But first, over the past few weeks, you could be forgiven for being confused about whether e-cigarettes are leading to more young people taking up smoking or fewer.
Smoking e-cigarettes leads teenagers to smoke tobacco, a study is claiming.
Young people who try e-cigarettes are not more likely to take up smoking as a result, according to a substantial new study.
Those headlines are reporting on two separate scientific studies with quite different conclusions. The first, which suggests that smoking e-cigarettes does lead teenagers to smoke tobacco, was carried out by the University of Leeds, and they surveyed 3,000 school pupils in England. The second, which concluded the opposite, was carried out by a team from the University of Stirling. It considered the result of 5 large-scale studies, which it says amounts to 60,000 young people. Robert Cuff is the BBC's head of statistics, and so we asked him to compare the two studies.
The first study asked a group of school children whether or not they had smoked or tried e-cigarettes, and then they came back to them a year later and asked the same questions again, and then they could explore whether people who had said they tried e-cigarettes were more likely to smoke at the end of the study. The trouble is, they didn't really have enough regular smokers in the trial to be able to answer the question definitively. So they can see an association between trying e-cigarettes and trying smoking, but of the 240 smokers they saw, only 20 of them smoked more than once a week at the end of the trial. So it's hard to get a definitive picture about regular smoking from that. The other study is a one-off question. So you just look at people once, ask them what their smoking behaviours are, and you leave it at that. So it's a different design, but it's much, much bigger. They had about 2,000 regular smokers in their sample, so they're able to estimate the frequency or how often people smoke much, much better. And what they saw is that the decline in smoking that we've seen since the turn of the century is continuing. So it's gone from about 1 in 3, for example, in Scotland in 2000, down to about 1 in 14 regular smokers now. So it's hard to conclude when you look at that data that the introduction of e-cigarettes is leading to a massive uptick in smoking. If I were looking at these two papers together, I would say they both add interesting evidence to the ongoing policy and academic debate about the relationship between these two. But I think the bottom line is, I wouldn't want my kids to smoke, but if they were going to smoke, it's probably better that they're on e-cigarettes. I don't think these studies change that picture.
The BBC's head of statistics, Robert Cuff, well, Professor Robert West is a smoking cessation expert, and he's the director of the Tobacco Studies Unit at the University College in London. I asked him for his take on these two studies, and particularly the way they appear to completely contradict each other.
I can see how it would be confusing to see the two results set against each other, but actually they don't really contradict each other because they're looking at somewhat different things. So the Leeds study, which was the smaller study of 3,000 people, took e-cigarette users and they saw whether if the young people had used an e-cigarette, they were more likely to be smokers or to have tried a cigarette at follow-up. Now, the issue with that study, as the authors rightly acknowledge, is that it's one thing to show an association and it's another thing to show that there's a causal relationship. It could be the same kind of people are more likely to try e-cigarettes and smoke. It's just the order in which they do it is different. The study from Stirling actually was a review of a number of different surveys that have been done over the last few years, which looks at a much bigger picture, not at whether a relatively small number of people who try an e-cigarette may be more likely to go on to smoke, but actually what's happening in the population as a whole. And what they rightly show is that the rate of decline in smoking among young people is at least as fast now as it ever has been. And so if e-cigarettes are slowing that rate of decline, we ought to be able to see that, and we don't. And you see a very similar thing in the United States as well, where the rate of decline in smoking among young people is actually a little faster than it has been before, despite the fact that we've got e-cigarettes on the market.
The figures are quite stark, aren't they? When Robert Cuff mentioned 1 in 3 people smoked in Scotland in 2000, and in 2016 that had dropped to 1 in 14. That is a stark difference, isn't it?
Absolutely. We have made huge progress in this country and in some other countries as well, not actually in most countries, but in some other countries, in reducing the rate at which people try smoking as young people. And we're also making massive progress in the rate at which we're encouraging and helping people to stop. So the picture's looking good. That's the good news. The bad news is we've still got at least 7 million smokers in this country. And if you're a smoker and you're aged 35 or more, then for every day literally every day that you carry on smoking, you're losing 4 to 6 hours of your life. So there's still a massive job to be done in getting the smoking rates down further.
This is about young people's attitudes to smoking as well as their actual physical habits. So our reporter Jay Unger spoke to some teenagers in Leeds.
I can see you puffing on an e-cig, so you've obviously tried one before. When did you get into it?
When they first came out.
And why e-cigarettes?
So it was to quit smoking. None of my friends have started using one because of me. My friend who smoked as well, he's on an e-cig, and he's the one that encouraged me to get one.
I think if it was either of the reports, I think it would be that e-cigs got you into smoking rather than the other way around. I think it's less harmful, so I think it's like testing the waters before they go for a journey.
That's really interesting. That last girl there said she believed that e-cigarettes would get you into smoking. Testing the water was the phrase she used. But it's very hard to say that it's definitive, isn't it?
Yes, I think there may be people out there who start on an e-cigarette and then go on to smoke who would never have smoked. But as the Sterling study showed, the number of people who haven't already smoked who regularly use an e-cigarette is extremely small. It's way less than 1% of the young people. So the numbers involved are very small. And at a bigger population level, what we're seeing is very large numbers of smokers who are using an e-cigarette to stop smoking. And the evidence to date is telling us that it's very likely that these devices are helping.
Professor Robert West from University College London.